Sim, Optional English. CBCS Part 1. DSc Discipline Specific Course, Optional English, Semester I. DSing 105, Understanding Literature I, 3 credits. 5 teaching hours. Theory 80 plus IA 20 equals 100. 3 HRS exam Unit I. History of English Literature, 2 HRS. 40 marks. 1. The Renaissance 2. Elizabethan Poetry 3. Elizabethan Drama 4. Metaphysical Poetry 5. Cavalier Poetry 6. Puritan Prose Unit Roman 2. Introduction to Literature, 1 HR. 10 marks. 1. What is literature? 2. Literature and Society 3. Literature and Culture 4. Literature and Science Unit Roman 3. Selected Poems, 1 HR. 20 marks. 1. And wilt thou leave me thus? Sir Thomas Wyatt 2. One day I wrote her name. Edmund Spenser 3. Tesselia, Ben Jonson 4. Sonnet 130. William Shakespeare 5. To his coy mistress, Andrew Marvell Unit Roman 4. Literary Forms and Tomes, 1 HR. 20 marks. 4. 1. Literary Forms. Essay, Novel, Tales, Legends, Sonnet, Lyric, Epic, Comedy, Tragedy, Tragicomedy, and Farce 4. 2. Literary Tomes. Allegory, Simile, Metaphor, Metonymy, Personification, Pun, Soliloquy, Chorus, Climax and Euphemism IA. 20 marks. 2 internal tests. 4 and 10 marks. Attendance 3 and tutorials 3 marks each. Theory. 80 marks total. 100 marks. Question paper pattern I. 10 objective questions on Unit I. 10x1 equals 10 Roman 2. 05 short answer type questions on Unit Roman 4 literary tomes. 4. 2. 5x02 equals 10 Roman 3. Essay type question on Unit I. 1 out of 2. 1x10 equals 10 Roman 4. Essay type question on Unit I. 1 out of 2. 1x10 equals 10v. Essay type question on Unit Roman 2. 1 out of 2. 1x10 equals 10vi. Essay type question on Unit Roman 3. 1 out of 2. 1x10 equals 10 Roman 7. Short notes on Unit Roman 3. 2 out of 4. 1x10 equals 10 Roman 8. Short notes on Unit Roman 4 literary forms. 4. 1. 2x05 equals 10 total. B.A. Semi-optional English Objective Q2 questions. Q answer each of the following in a word, a phrase, or a sentence. 10x1 equals 10. 1. What does Renaissance mean? Renaissance means rebirth or revival of European art and culture under influence of classical model in 14th-16th century. 2. Write any 2 features of Renaissance. I. The quest for knowledge, Roman 2. The rise of civility, Roman 3. The new world of religion and science, write any 2. 3. Which is the first English tragedy? Gorboduc, Orpherex and Porrex, 1561, written by Thomas Norton and Thomas Sackville. 4. Which is the first English comedy? Ralph Royster Doyster, 1550, written by Nicholas Udall. 5. Name any 2 tragedies written by Shakespeare. A. Hamlet. B. Othello. C. King Lear. D. Macbeth, Julius Caesar, Right any 2. 6. When was the first folio of Shakespeare plays published? In 1623. 7. Who said, Shakespeare is not of one age, but of all ages? Ben Jonson. 8. How many sonnets Shakespeare wrote? -154. 9. Name the 2 poems written by W. Shakespeare. I. Venus, and Adonis, Roman 2, The Rape of Lucrece. 10. Who according to Charles Lamb was a poet's poet? Edmund Spenser. 11. Who is the poet of Fairy Queen? Edmund Spenser. 12. Who introduced sonnet first to English poetry? Sir Thomas Wyatt and Henry Howard, all of Surrey. 13. Who wrote Romance, Arcadia? Philip Sidney. 14. Who wrote Apology for Poetry? Philip Sidney. 15. Who is the author of Canterbury Tales? Geoffrey Chaucer. 16. Who wrote Tragedy, Duchess of Malfi? Christopher Marlowe. 17. Who is the author of Dr. Faustus? Christopher Marlowe. 18. Who wrote The Jew of Malta? Christopher Marlowe. 19. Who completed Marlowe's uncompleted poem, The Hero, and Leander George Chapman. 20. Who translated Homer's work into English in 1616? George Chapman. 21. Who commented on Marlowe's use of blank verse as mighty lines? Ben Jonson. 22. Name any 2 dramatists from University Wits. 1. Christopher Marlowe. 2. Robert Greene. 3. Thomas Norton.
मुझे याद है क्या तेरी वो नजर मिलाना फिर देख के
4. Thomas Lodge. 5. John Lyly. 6. George Peale. Write any 2. 23. Books, and their writers from University Wits. I. Rosalind. Thomas Lodge. Roman 2. The Unfortunate Traveller Thomas Nash. Roman 3. Euphues. John Lyly. Roman 4. The Spanish Tragedy Thomas Kidd. 24. Name 2 Cavalier Poets. I. Robert Herrick. 2. Thomas Care. 3. Sir John Suckling. 4. Richard Lovelace. Write any 2. 25. Who wrote The Pilgrim's Progress? John Bunyan. 26. Whose greatest work is Religio Medici? Sir Thomas Browne. 27. Who is the father of English essay? Francis Bacon. 28. When were the theatres closed in England? In September 1642. 29. In which year was the authorized version of Bible published? 1611. 30. Who is known as Virgin Queen? Queen Elizabeth I. 31. Name the work by Milton on censorship. Aeropagitica. 32. Name the 2 works of John Webster. I. The White Devil. Roman 2. The Duchess of Malfi. 33. Who is the author of Canterbury Tales? Geoffrey Chaucer. 34. Name the leader of Puritan movement. Oliver Cromwell. 35. Name the leader of Metaphysical School of Poetry. John Donne. 36. Who first coined the term metaphysical poet? Samuel Johnson in his book, Life of Cowley. 37. Who said, Donne affects the metaphysics? John Dryden. 38. Who composed Tuttle's Miscellany? Lord Henry Howard. All of Surrey, and Thomas Wyatt. 39. Who wrote the historical poem on Wars of Roses named The Civil Wars. Samuel Daniel. 40. What is the other name of the play, The Silent Woman, written by Ben Jonson? Epicene. 41. Who wrote Volpone? Ben Jonson. 42. Who popularized Comedy of Humors? Ben Jonson. 43. Name the two famous character writers of the 17th century. I. Joseph Hall, Roman 2, John Hall, Roman 3, Sir Thomas Overbury. 44. Who wrote Sonnet Sequence, Astrophel, and Stella? Philip Sidney. 108 sonnets, addressed to Lady Penelope. 45. Who wrote Sonnet Sequence, Amoretti? Edmund Spenser. 88 sonnets, addressed to Elizabeth Boyle. History of English Literature. I. 1. The Renaissance. 1. Write a brief note on the Renaissance, and its features. 10m. 2. Estimate the impact of Renaissance of English literature. 10m. 3. What is Renaissance, and what are its important features? 10m. Answer. A. Introduction. The Renaissance means rebirth, reawakening or revival of learning. It marks the transition from the medieval to the modern world. The Renaissance began in Italy around the mid-14th century, slowly moving outward over all Europe, and reaching England around the 16th century. The Renaissance had its most important effect on painting, sculpture, architecture and literature, though it derived inspiration from the sciences, medicines, philosophy and geography. We can distinguish three phases of literature of English Renaissance. They are, I. The beginning of Renaissance, 1516-1558. 2. The flowering of Renaissance, 15,581,603. This period is also known as Elizabethan period. Roman 3. The decline of Renaissance, 1603-1625. This age is also called as Jacobean age. B. Beginning of Renaissance, 1516-1558. Humanism was the keynote during the beginning of Renaissance. Humanism emphasizes in the dignity of the human beings, and the importance of present life. It posits the ability to perfect human being, and to perform wonders. The invention of printing press during this time is termed as milestone. Major authors during this period are Thomas More, Desiderius Erasmus, William Tyndale, Thomas Wyatt, and Sir Thomas Malory. C. Flowering of Renaissance, 1603-1625. We find true Renaissance spirit in this period. New literary forms like poetry, prose, plays found their master hands. University wits and Shakespeare masterpieces are created in this period. Following are the literary giants we have in this flowering phase of Renaissance. Dramatis: Shakespeare, Marlowe, Webster, and Johnson. Poets: Sidney, Spenser, Donne, and Milton. Prose writers: Bacon, Nash, Raleigh, Browne, and Hooker. D. Features of Renaissance. 1. Quest for knowledge. Reading ancient Greek and Latin texts, scholars of this period began to think extensively about human nature. In fact, the definition and features of what it means to be human emerges during this period. what we now know as humanities, arts, language, originated in the Renaissance quest for more knowledge about the human mind and body. Thinkers developed theories in philosophy, psychology, and medicine in order to define the human. It also included a great love for the artist, and the arts, music, painting and literature, was seen as the highest expression of culture and civilization. This search for knowledge was aided by the invention of printing. Books became cheaper, and more people began to read. 2. The rise of civility. Civility, courtesy, and manners were key words in Renaissance culture. All over Europe, people were writing courtesy books, which told people how to behave etiquette. Civility was supposed to be the mark of cultured man, who begins to be called gentleman. The gentleman was brave, interested in the arts, always courteous and graceful, knew Latin, and was a brilliant conversationalist. Castiglione's Courtier, 1528, was a popular book of instructions for such gentlemen. It was translated into English in 1561 from the original. In England, this gentleman was always a man who owned a land, and was therefore inevitably from the aristocracy. 3. The new religion. In Europe, Martin Luther, 1483-1546, and later John Calvin, 1509-64, led a reformation of Christianity. The individual's experience of faith and God became more important than the church's rituals or priest's role. However, even this highly individualistic, it gave more importance to the individual rather than to any institution. System of faith developed into an institution by the 16th century. 4. The New World. Christopher Columbus' discovery of America marked an important change in European life. More commercial transactions across the sea began. Travelers sent back reports of the new sights they saw, and the new people they met. Europe's idea of the world changed drastically, because it came in contact with other cultures, and the new way of thinking. 5. The New Science. In 1543, Copernicus argued that the sun is at the center of the universe, as opposed to the Ptolemaic theory, which argued that the earth is at the center of the universe. A theory endorsed by the Church. This meant that the earth was not the most important unit of the universe. Discoveries of the planet heavenly bodies by Kepler and Galileo changed Europeans' vision of creation. Astronomical images fill John Donne's poetry. For instance, Francis Bacon encouraged experiments in science. René Descartes explored the forms and processes of human thinking. The discovery of circulation of blood and more detailed dissections on human body revealed new truths about human anatomy. The Renaissance slowly rejected religious and superstitious beliefs in favor of actual scientific experiments and logical/rational thinking. The origin of 17th and 18th century enlightenment can be traced back this. Conclusion. The revival starred men as the voyages of Da Gama, and Columbus starred the manners of the Mediterranean. First came science and inventions, making their slowly way against the prejudice of the authorities, and opening man's eyes to the unexplored realms of nature. Then came the flood of Greek literature, which the new art of painting carried swiftly to every school in Europe, revealing a new world of poetry and philosophy. Scholars flocked to the universities, as adventurers to the new world of America, and there the old authority received a death blow. Truth only was authority to search for truth everywhere, as men sought for new lands. That was the new spirit awoke in Europe with the revival of new learning renaissance. 2. Elizabethan poetry. Q. Comment on contribution of Elizabethan poets to English literature. Answer. Introduction. One of the literary historians called Elizabethan age as a nest of singing birds about the composition of poetry in this period. There were many poets who contributed to develop this form of literature, and it reached the peak of its development. The poetry of Elizabethan era mirrors the spirit of age. It reflects the spirit of conquest and self-glorification, humanism and vigorous imagination, emotional depth and passionate intensity. Sublimity was considered to be the essential quality of poetry. Spenser, Shakespeare and Marlowe had the immense power to exalt and sublimate the lovers of poetry. The poetry of his period is remarkable for the spirit of independence. The poets refused to follow set rules of poetic composition. Consequently, new poetic devices and new linguistic modes developed. All varieties of poetic forms like lyric, elegy, eclogue, ode, sonnet etc. were successfully attempted. B. Poets of the age. Wyatt and Surrey travelled widely in Italy. They brought to England the Italian and classic influence. They modelled their poetry on Italian pattern. They are the first harbingers of the Renaissance in English poetry. They are the first modern poets. The book that contains their poems is Songs and Sonnets, known as the Tottle's Miscellany. I. Sir Thomas Wyatt. Wyatt brought to English poetry grace, harmony and nobility. He followed the Italian models, and attempted a great variety of metrical experiment, songs, sonnets, madrigals and elegies. He was the first poet who introduced sonnet, which was a favorite poetical form in England. He first of all introduced personal or autobiographical note in English poetry. Wyatt's true ability as a poet is revealed not by the sonnets, but by a number of lyrics and songs that he composed. Roman 2. All of Surrey. Surrey is a disciple of Wyatt rather than an independent poetical force. His sonnets are more effective than those of Wyatt. Wyatt followed the Petrarchan pattern of sonnet, whereas Surrey modified it and made it typical English. Shakespeare followed the English pattern of sonnet, introduced by Surrey. He was the first poet to use blank verse in his translation of Aeneid. Roman 3. Thomas Sackville. Sackville was a great humanist, whose only contribution to England poetry is the induction. He has a sureness of touch, and a freedom from technical errors, which make him superior to Wyatt and Surrey. Roman 4. Sir Philip Sidney. Sidney was the most celebrated literary figure before Spenser and Shakespeare. As a man of letters he is remembered for Arcadia, a romance, Apology for Poetry, a collection of critical and literary principles, and Astrophel and Stella, a collection of sonnets. These 108 love sonnets are the first direct expressions of personal feelings, and experience in English poetry. He analyzes the sequence of his feelings with a vividness and minuteness. His sonnet so much to Petrarch, and runs hard in tone and style. V. Edmund Spenser. Edmund Spenser is rightly called the poet's poet, because all great poets of England have been indebted to him. Spenser's main poetical works are The Shepherd's Calendar, Amoretti, a collection of 88 Petrarchan sonnets epithalamion, a magnificent ode written on the occasion of his marriage with Elizabeth Boyle, Prothalamion, an ode on marriage, Astrophel, an elegy on the death of Sir Philip Sidney. His epic poem is The Fairy Queen. He is a matchless painter in words. His contribution to poetic style, diction and versification is memorable. He evolved a true poetic style, which the succeeding generations of English poets used. The introduction of Spenserian stanza is Spenser's most remarkable contribution to poetry. He is great because of the extraordinary smoothness and melody, his verse, and the richness of his language, a golden diction, which he drew from every source, new words, old words, obsolete words. V.I. William Shakespeare. Shakespeare composed many beautiful sonnets, and 2 long poems, Venus, and Adonis and the Rape of Lucrece. In the former the realistic passions are expressed through equally realistic pictures and episodes. It is remarkable for astonishing linguistic beauty. The latter is a contrast to the former. Having painted the attempts of an amorous woman, Shakespeare now proceeded to represent the rape of a chaste wife. Roman 7, Christopher Marlowe, and George Chapman the hero, and Leander was left incomplete due to Marlowe's untimely death. It was completed by Chapman. This poem is remarkable for felicity of diction, and flexibility of versification. The poets show great skill in effectively using words and images. Besides completing Hero and Leander, Chapman also translated Iliad and Odyssey and composed some sonnets. See Elizabethan sonnets and sonneteers. The sonnet originated in Italy in the 14th century. It is particularly associated with the name of Petrarch. It was originally a short poem, recited to the accompaniment of music. The word sonnet is derived from the Italian word sonetto, meaning a little sound or strain. In course of time it became a short poem of 14 lines with a set rhyme scheme. In England Wyatt and Surrey began sonnet writing in imitation of the Italian sonnet. The publication of Sidney's Astrophel and Stella marks the real beginning of Elizabethan sonnet. Spenser's Amoretti, a collection of 88 sonnets, is memorable contribution to the art of sonnet writing. They are addressed to Elizabeth Boyle, whom he married. Shakespeare is the greatest writer of the sonnet form. His 154 sonnets are the most precious pearls of Elizabethan lyricism. Drayton is a distinguished sonneteer of Elizabethan age. His sonnet sequence, known as idea, represents Platonic idea of beauty. He wrote 52 sonnets. He uses typical stock devices. The conclusion. The age of Shakespeare was the golden age of sonnet. Each poet contributed something new to the art of sonnet writing. The average Elizabethan sonnet illustrates the temper of the age. It bears graphic witness to the Elizabethan tendency to borrow from foreign literary sources. 3. 1. Elizabethan drama. 1. Make the assessment of rich harvest of the English drama during Elizabethan period. 10. Answer. 1. Introduction. The Elizabethan period marks the real beginning of drama. It is the golden age of English drama. The renewed study of classical drama shaped English drama in its formative years. Seneca influenced the development of English tragedy, and Plantus and Terence directed the formation of English comedy. Mystery and miracle plays, morality plays, and interludes have made desired background in every sense for Elizabethan drama. Tragedy, comedy, tragic comedy, and historical plays were successfully written during this period. Nicholas Udall's Ralph Royster Doyster, 1553, is the first English comedy of the classical school. The first complete tragedy of Senecan type is Gorboduc, 1562, which is written by Thomas Norton and Thomas Sackville. 2. Features of Elizabethan drama. 1. Comedies written during this era follow Italian models. Love was a major theme in comedies. The language used was more alive and direct. 2. For tragedies, Seneca is a great model for all Elizabethan playwrights. Immortality, greed, revenge and cruelty are the famous themes in tragedies. 3. History is treated effectively. Historical events along with political issues were discussed elaborately. 4. Well-constructed plots were the hallmark of Elizabethan plays. The best examples are Shakespeare's Merchant of Venice and Marlowe's Dr. Faustus. 5. The new Elizabethan hero was full of passions and doubts. He had replaced the old allegorical character and provided new material for drama. 3. Elizabethan dramatists. Elizabethan dramatists can be divided into groups i.e. 1. Group of dramatists belongs to university wits. 2. Shakespeare. First we will discuss about university wits. 3. 1. University wits. The university wits were a group of late 16th century English playwrights who were educated at the universities, Oxford or Cambridge, and who became playwrights and popular secular writers. Prominent members of this group were Christopher Marlowe, Robert Greene, and Thomas Nash from Cambridge, and John Lyly, Thomas Lodge, George Peale from Oxford. This diverse and talented loose association of London writers and dramatists set the stage for the theatrical renaissance of Elizabethan England. The term, university wits, was coined by George Saintsbury, a 19th century journalist and author. Christopher Marlowe. Christopher Marlowe was perhaps the greatest among the university wits. He was the only dramatist who was compared to Shakespeare even though he lacked the warm humanity of Shakespearean plays. Marlowe was fond of tragic in literature. He had no interest in comedy. His plays were one-man show they centered on one figure. Though he had some lacking, he was remarkable for being lyrical and romantic in his dramatic presentation of life. All his plays were poetic and artistic. He created authentic romantic tragedy in English, and paved the way for the full blossoming of Shakespeare's dramatic genius. Marlowe's famous plays are Tamburlaine the Great, Dr. Faustus, Edward Roman II, and The Jew of Malta. They place him as dominant figure among university wits. A.C. Swinburne calls Marlowe the first great poet, the father of English tragedy, and the creator of blank verse. His blank verse, which Ben Jonson calls Marlowe's mighty line, is noticeable for its splendor of diction, picturesqueness, vigor and energy, its responsiveness to the demands of varying emotions. B. Thomas Kidd. Thomas Kidd is another important dramatist of the university wits. He introduced the tradition of revenge play. We can easily find the influence of Kidd in Shakespeare's Hamlet, and Webster's The Duchess of Malfi. The Spanish tragedy is the best work of Thomas Kidd. This play had some outstanding features. The plot is horrific. There are murders, madness and death, but it earned a huge popularity for the play. C. Thomas Lodge. Thomas Lodge was a lawyer by profession, but he gave up his career, and took literature as career. He wrote only few dramas. Rosalind is the most famous of his romantic comedies. It is said that Shakespeare took the plot of his As You Like It from Lodge's Rosalind. D. Thomas Nash. Thomas Nash was an English Elizabethan pamphleteer, playwright, poet and satirist. He got involved in politics as well. His works had satiric tone. Prose tale, Unfortunate Traveller, is his best work, which had much influence as far as the development of English novel is concerned. E. Robert Greene. Robert Greene was an English author best known for a pamphlet, Broadsword of Wit, widely believed to contain a polemic attack on William Shakespeare. He became the first professional author in England. Greene published in many genres including autobiography, plays, and romances, while capitalizing on a scandalous reputation. Friar Bacon, and Friar Bungay, and James Roman IV are two of his best work. F. George Peale. George Peale was another important dramatist of the university wits. His plays had romantic, satiric and historical evidence. He had no attraction towards the poetry. He handled blank verse with variety, and had a sense of humor and pathos. Edward I was perhaps his best work. G. John Lyly. John Lyly was an English writer, best known for his books Euphues, The Anatomy of Wit, and Euphues and His England. Lyly's linguistic style, originating in his first books, is known as Euphuism. Lyly wrote 7 comedies. He must be considered and remembered as a primary influence on the plays of William Shakespeare, and in particular the romantic comedies. Love's Metamorphosis is a large influence on Love's Labour's Lost, and Galatea is a major source for A Midsummer Night's Dream. 3. 2. William Shakespeare. Shakespeare is known as the father of English drama. He is known as England's national poet, and the Bard of Avon. He wrote 36 plays, 154 sonnets, 2 long narrative poems. His dramas can be divided into histories, tragedies and comedies. His play Hamlet is considered to be the epitome of the Renaissance, in which the protagonist achieves his perfection only after death. His play Richard Roman III is the epitome of Machiavellian evil, in which Shakespeare balances between the role of the king and the role of the man. As the dramatist of the Renaissance age, Shakespearean plays focus on the man, exploring his weaknesses, depravities, flaws etc. Shakespeare, in his plays, goes into the depth of human behavior, and redefines the geography of the human soul. 4. Conclusion. We can conclude that university wits have much influence in the history of English drama. Their writing is of a great height. We can find their influence in later dramas of the Elizabethan period. No doubt university paved the way for the full blossoming of Shakespeare's dramatic genius. 3. University wits. 2. Write a note on contribution of university wits to English drama. 10. Answer. 1. Introduction. The university wits were a group of late 16th century English playwrights, who were educated at the universities, Oxford, or Cambridge, and who became playwrights, and popular secular writers. Prominent members of this group were Christopher Marlowe, Robert Greene, and Thomas Nash from Cambridge, and John Lyly, Thomas Lodge, George Peale from Oxford. They were looked upon as the literary elite of the day, and often ridiculed other playwrights, such as Thomas Kyd, and Shakespeare, who did not have a university education. Greene calls Shakespeare an upstart crow. The chief university wits includes Christopher Marlowe, Thomas Lodge, Thomas Nash, Robert Greene, George Peale, and John Lyly. The term, university wits, was coined by George Saintsbury, a 19th century journalist and author. 2. Characteristics of university wits. Their plays had some common characteristics. 1. University wits had a fondness of introducing heroic themes in their dramas. They often took it from the lives of great figures. They gave heroic treatment to the heroic themes. 2. Their dramas usually had variety, splendid description, and violent incidents. 3. Their chief aim was to achieve strong and sounding lines. The best example was Marlowe, who is famous for his use of blank verse, for the themes used in their dramas were usually tragic in nature. There was lack of real humor in their dramas. 3. Dramatists. Christopher Marlowe. Christopher Marlowe was perhaps the greatest among the university wits. He was the only dramatist who was compared to Shakespeare, even though he lacked the warm humanity of Shakespearean plays. Marlowe was fond of tragic in literature. He had no interest in comedy. His plays were one-man show. They centered on one figure. Though he had some lacking, he was remarkable for being lyrical and romantic in his dramatic presentation of life. All his plays were poetic and artistic. He created authentic romantic tragedy in English. Marlowe's famous plays are Tamburlaine the Great, Dr. Faustus, Edward Roman II, and The Jew of Malta. They place him as dominant figure among university wits. A.C. Swinburne calls Marlowe the first great poet, the father of English tragedy, and the creator of blank verse. His blank verse, which Ben Jonson calls Marlowe's mighty line, is noticeable for its splendor of diction, picturesqueness, vigor and energy, its responsiveness to the demands of varying emotions. B. Thomas Kyd. Thomas Kyd is another important dramatist of the university wits. He introduced the tradition of revenge play. We can easily find the influence of Kyd in Shakespeare's Hamlet and Webster's The Duchess of Malfi. The Spanish Tragedy is the best work of Thomas Kidd. This play had some outstanding features. The plot is horrific. There are murders, madness and death, but it earned a huge popularity for the play. See Thomas Lodge. Thomas Lodge was a lawyer by profession, but he gave up his career and took literature as career. He wrote only few dramas. Rosalind is the most famous of his romantic comedies. It is said that Shakespeare took the plot of his As You Like It from Lodge's Rosalind. D. Thomas Nash. Thomas Nash was an English Elizabethan pamphleteer, playwright, poet and satirist. He got involved in politics as well. His works had satiric tone. Prose tale, Unfortunate Traveller, is his best work, which had much influence as far as the development of English novel is concerned. E. Robert Greene. Robert Greene was an English author best known for a pamphlet Broadsword of Wit, widely believed to contain a polemic attack on William Shakespeare. He became the first professional author in England. Greene published in many genres including autobiography, plays, and romances, while capitalizing on a scandalous reputation. Friar Bacon, and Friar Bungay, and James Roman are two of his best work. Peale explored London life, and society, its villainy, its swindles, its heroics, its nationalist sentiments especially against France and Spain. F. George Peale. George Peale was another important dramatist of the university wits. His plays had romantic, satiric and historical evidence. He explored London life and society, its villainy, its swindles, its heroics, its nationalist sentiments, especially against France and Spain in his works. In the arrangement of Paris, Peale flatters the Queen of England. Edward I was perhaps his best work. G. John Lyly. John Lyly was an English writer, best known for his books Euphues, The Anatomy of Wit, and Euphues and His England. Lyly's linguistic style, originating in his first books, is known as Euphuism. Lyly wrote 7 comedies. He must be considered and remembered as a primary influence on the plays of William Shakespeare, and in particular the romantic comedies. Love's Metamorphosis is a large influence on Love's Labour's Lost, and Galatea is a major source for A Midsummer Night's Dream. 4. Conclusion. We can conclude that university wits have much influence in the history of English drama. Their writing is of a great height. We can find their influence in later dramas of the Elizabethan period. No doubt, university paved the way for the full blossoming of Shakespeare's dramatic genius. History of English Literature, Roman 2. 4. Metaphysical Poetry. Q. What is the contribution of metaphysical poetry to English literature? Answer. A. Introduction. Metaphysical poets is the name given to a diverse group of 17th century English poets. Their work is notable for its ingenious use of intellectual and theological concepts in surprising conceits, strange paradoxes, and far-fetched imagery. Metaphysical poems are lyric poems. They are brief, but intense meditations, characterized by striking use of wit, irony and wordplay. This is a very broad term, but it joins together poets, most notable among them John Donne, George Herbert, Richard Crashaw, Andrew Marvell, Henry Vaughan, and Abraham Cowley. B. Tom, metaphysical. The Tom, metaphysical poet, was first coined by the critic Samuel Johnson, 1709-1784, in his book, Life of Cowley. He used Tom metaphysical to describe group of 17th century poets, who he viewed as the men of learning, and felt that to show their learning was their whole endeavor. Earlier, John Dryden had also been critical of the group of poets he grouped together as too proud of their wit. In his essay, Discourse Concerning Satire, Dryden remarked that John Donne in his poems affects the metaphysics. Later T.S. Eliot in his most influential essay The Metaphysical Poets, 1921, argued that in the works of metaphysical poets one can find fusion of thought and feeling. Eliot further added that later poets were unable to achieve this because of dissociation of sensibility. This, according to Eliot, is the reason that later work was either talk back on Insta Reader. 50 stop in previous page, button, next play. According to Eliot setting. Dialogue. 51 minutes. 51:30. 51:30. This is setting. Play. Next play. According to Eliot is the reason that later work was either intellectual or emotional. Faster. Play. According to Eliot is the talk back off. According to Eliot is the reason that later work was either intellectual or emotional but not both at once. C. Features of metaphysical poetry. Although in no sense a school or movement proper, they share common characteristics of wit, inventiveness, and a love of elaborate stylistic maneuvers. Following are some chief characteristics of metaphysical poetry. 1. Use of ordinary speech mixed with puns, paradoxes and conceits. A paradoxical metaphor causing a shock to the reader by the strangeness of the objects compared. Some examples. Lovers and a compass, the soul and timber, the body and mind. 2. The exaltation of wit, which in the 17th century meant an nimbleness of thought, a sense of fancy, imagination of a fantastic or whimsical nature, and originality in figures of speech. 3. Abstruse terminology often drawn from science or law. 4. Often poems are presented in the form of an argument. 5. In love poetry, the metaphysical poets often draw on ideas from Renaissance Neoplatonism to show the relationship between the soul and body and the union of lovers' souls. 6. They also try to show a psychological realism when describing the tensions of love. 7. These poems are full of obscurity, which means confusion and haziness for common readers. D. Poets of the metaphysical world. 1. John Donne. Donne is considered the master of the metaphysical poetry. In his poems we get some unique versatility. He yoked together two entirely opposite ideas, and told very serious matter with the help of playfulness, intellectuality, cleverness, and unique diction we can find in his poems. He draws the material of his figure of speech from highly non-poetical sources. The material is abstract, but Donne gives it full poetic concrete pictures. His imaginative writing, use of conceit, abrupt opening with a dramatic style, and colloquial diction made his poems unique. His poetry is noted for its ingenious fusion of wit, and seriousness and represents a shift from classical models towards a more personal style. In that time he took the major position for writing metaphysical poetry. 2. George Herbert. George Herbert followed the lead offered by Donne, but he also made contributions, which were quite distinct. Herbert's distinguishing characteristic is his simplicity of diction and metaphor. A technique Herbert introduced was the ending of a poem with 2 quiet lines, which resolved the argument in the poem without answering the specific points raised by it. Herbert occasionally explores his doubts in intellectual terms, but answers them with emotion. Herbert's poetry is certainly about struggles of a religious kind. In these respects Herbert can be considered to have broken new ground, into which Henry Vaughan followed later. 3. Henry Vaughan. He is considered one of the major metaphysical poets, whose works ponder one's personal relationship to God. He shares Herbert's preoccupation with the relationship between humanity and God. He saw mankind as restless, and constantly seeking a sense of harmony and fulfillment through contact with God. His images are more universal, or cosmic, even to the point of judging man in relation to infinity. The term visionary is appropriate to Vaughan, not only because of the grand scale of his images, but also because his metaphors frequently draw on the sense of vision. 4. Andrew Marvell. The life and work of Andrew Marvell are both marked by extraordinary variety and range. Gifted with a most subtle and introspective imagination, his technique of drawing upon philosophy to illustrate his argument gives the poem an intellectual appeal, not just a visual one. There is also complete devotion displayed in this first stage of the argument, namely, I would love you 10 years before the flood, and you should, if you please, refuse till the conversion of the Jews. In Marvell we find the presence of passion into his coy mistress, used as a pagan, which to hang serious reflections on the brevity of happiness. The definition of love is an ironic game, more a love of definition let loose. The poem is cool, lucid and dispassionate. 5. Richard Crashaw. He wrote many metaphysical poems following Donne. His verse is somewhat uneven in quality. It is characterized by brilliant use of extravagant Baroque imagery. Crashaw owed all the basis of his style, as has been already hinted, to Donne. His originality was one of treatment and technique. He forged a more rapid and brilliant short line than any of his predecessors had done. With brief intervals and along sudden paths of his own he carried English prosody to a higher refinement, a more glittering felicity, than it had ever achieved. Thus, in spite of his conceits and his romantic coloring, he points the way for Pope, who did not disdain to borrow from him freely. Conclusion. Metaphysical poets created a new trend in history of English literature. These poems have been created in such a way that one must have enough knowledge to get the actual meaning. Metaphysical poets made use of everyday speech, intellectual analysis, and unique imagery. The creator of metaphysical poetry, John Donne, along with his followers, is successful not only in that period, but also in the modern age. Metaphysical poetry takes an important place in the history of English literature for its unique versatility, and it is popular among thousands of people still now. 5. Cavalier poetry. Q. Elucidate the contribution of cavalier poetry to English literature. Answer. Introduction. Cavalier poets are members of the aristocracy, wrote their poems in the 17th century, and they supported the King Charles I, who was later executed as a result of a civil war. They were known as royalists. Cavalier poetry mirrored the attitudes of courtiers. The meaning of cavalier is showing arrogant, or offhand disregard, carefree and nonchalant. This describes the attitude of cavalier poets. Some of the most prominent cavalier poets were Thomas Care, Richard Lovelace, Robert Herrick, and John Suckling. They matched Ben Jonson, a contemporary of Shakespeare. B. Characteristics. 1. The cavalier poets were fond of a tight and chiseled form, and practiced shorter lines, precise diction, and a tight logical structure. The tone of cavalier poetry was generally easygoing. 2. The themes for their poetry included love, cynicism, pagan sensibility, and conventional patriotism. 3. Unlike the metaphysical poets, the cavaliers did not engage in serious debates. In fact, cavalier poetry is much simpler than that of the metaphysical poetry. Wit and a lot of eroticism are visible in the cavalier poetry. 4. Cavalier poets were writers of witty and polished lyrics of courtship and gallantry. 5. Many of the cavalier poems centered around sensual, romantic love, and also the idea of carpe diem, which means to seize the day. To the cavalier poet, enjoying life was far more important than following moral codes. They lived for the moment. C. Cavalier poets. 1. Robert Herrick. Herrick enjoys the highest status among the cavalier poets. Herrick was the only cavalier who was not a courtier. He was the first of the sons of Ben who came under his influence. He does not seem to have paid much attention to Elizabethan lyricists before him. But his first guide was Saint Ben, whose aid he invoked in his poem, Prayer to Ben Jonson. Herrick was perfectly convinced of his immortality as a poet, and therefore very assiduously he preserved each and every scrap of his writing. His only book Hesperides appeared in 1648, contains about 1200 poems, few of which extend beyond 100 lines. He sings mostly of woman, love, wine, and song. But he also exhibits a refreshing love for trees, plants, and flowers, and often looks at them as emblems of human predicament. 2. Thomas Care. Whereas Herrick looked to Jonson alone, Care blends in his poetry the metaphysical manner of Donne, and the classical spirit of Ben Jonson. His poems on Donne and Jonson express admirably his keen appreciation of his two guides. Jonson was to him the man greater than all men else, and Donne the poet were all that went before. Care shows more of critical intelligence and sense of pattern than Herrick, but he suffers in imaginative power, which gets a substitute in a kind of courtly wit. 3. Sir John Suckling. It is customary to characterize Suckling as both an irresponsible man and an irresponsible poet. On the personal side also the estimate is a little misleading. His cynical observations on female capriciousness and inconstancy and his hard, introspective realism remind one of Donne. His best known poem is the song from Aglora, Why So Pale, Lover, which expresses a somewhat Donnian sentiment. 4. Richard Lovelace. Lovelace is the least important of the foursome of Cavalier poets named above. He was a very well-educated courtier, and was even sent to prison for favoring the king actively in the Civil War. It was in 1648 that while in prison he prepared for the press his volume entitled Lucasta, Epodes, Odes, Sonnets, Songs, etc. Though his poems are full of freshness and exuberance, he lacks the fancy of Herrick, the force of Suckling, and the polish of Keogh. The conclusion. The Cavalier lyric does not, by any means, enjoy an inconsiderable position in the history of English literature. They lack the spontaneity and emotional intensity of the Elizabethans. Being royalist, they were on the side of King Charles I in his hard times. 6. Puritan prose. Q. Write an essay on Puritan prose. Q. Comment upon the Puritan prose as the voice of age. Q. Trace the development of 17th century prose. Answer. A. Introduction. The 17th century up to 1660 was dominated by Puritanism, and it may be called the Puritan Age, or the Age of Milton, who was the noblest representative of the Puritan spirit. Broadly speaking, the Puritan movement in literature may be considered as the second, and greater Renaissance, marked by the rebirth of the moral nature of man, which followed the intellectual awakening of Europe in the 15th and 16th centuries. The Puritan movement stood for liberty of the people from the shackles of the despotic ruler, as well as the introduction of morality and high ideals in politics. Thus it had two objects: personal righteousness and civil and religious liberty. In other words, it aimed at making men honest and free. This period was rich in prose. The great prose writers were Bacon, Burton, Milton, Sir Thomas Browne, Jeremy Taylor, and Clarendon. English prose, which had been formed into a harmonious and pliable instrument by the Elizabethans, began to be used in various ways, as narrative as well as vehicle for philosophical speculation and scientific knowledge. For the first time the great scholars began to write in English rather than Latin. The greatest single influence, which enriched the English prose, was the authorized version of the Bible, English translation of the Bible, which was the result of the efforts of scholars, who wrote in a forceful, simple and pure Anglo-Saxon tongue, avoiding all that was rough, foreign and affected. So the Bible became the supreme example of earlier English prose style: simple, plain and natural. As it was read by the people in general, its influence was all-pervasive. B. Puritan prose writers. 1. Francis Bacon. Bacon belongs both to the Elizabethan and Jacobean periods. As a prose writer he is the master of the aphoristic style. He has the knack of compressing his wisdom in epigrams, which contain the quintessence of his rich experience of life. His style is clear, lucid but terse, and that is why one has to make an effort to understand his meaning. It lacks spaciousness, ease and rhythm. The reader has always to be alert, because each sentence is packed with meaning. Bacon is best known for his essays, in which he has given his views about the art of managing men, and getting on successfully in life. They may be considered as a kind of manual for statesmen and princes. The tone of the essay, "Worldly man, who wants to secure material success and prosperity." Besides the essays, Bacon wrote The Advancement of Learning, which is a brilliant popular exposition of the cause of scientific investigation. Though Bacon himself did not make any great scientific discovery, he popularized science through his writings. 2. Robert Burton. Burton is known for his The Anatomy of Melancholy, which is a book of its own type in the English language. In it he has analyzed human melancholy, described its effect, and prescribed its cure. But more than that, the book deals with all the ills that flesh is heir to, and the author draws his material from writers, ancient as well as modern. It is written in a straightforward, simple and vigorous style, which at times is marked with rhythm and beauty. 3. Sir Thomas Browne. He belonged entirely to a different category. With him the manner of writing is more important than the substance. He is, therefore, the first deliberate stylist in the English language, the forerunner of Charles Lamb and Stevenson. Being a physician with a flair for writing, he wrote Religio Medici, in which he set down his beliefs and thoughts, the religion of the medical man. In this book, which is written in an amusing, personal style, the conflict between the author's intellect and his religious beliefs gives it a peculiar charm. Every sentence has the stamp of Browne's individuality. His other important prose work is Hydriotaphia, or The Urn Burial, in which, meditating on time and antiquity, Browne reaches the heights of rhetorical splendor. He is greater as an artist than a thinker, and his prose is highly complex in its structure, and almost poetic in richness of language. 4. John Milton. Most of Milton's prose writings are concerned with the questions at issue between the Parliament and the King. Being the champion of freedom in every form, he wrote a forceful tract on the doctrine and discipline of divorce, in which he strongly advocated the right to divorce. His most famous prose work is Areopagitica, which was occasioned by a parliamentary order for submitting the press to censorship. Here Milton vehemently criticized the bureaucratic control over genius. Though as a pamphleteer Milton at times indulges in downright abuse, and he lacks humor and lightness of touch, yet there is that inherent sublimity in his prose writings, which we associate with him as a poet and man. When he touches a noble thought, the wings of his imagination lift him to majestic heights. 5. Earl of Clarendon. The greatest writer in the parliamentary struggle for the Milton was the Earl of Clarendon. His prose is stately, and he always writes with a bias, which is rather offensive, as we find in his History of the Rebellion and Civil Wars in England. 6. Jeremy Taylor. Taylor was a bishop, made himself famous by his literary sermons. On account of the gentle charm of his language, the richness of his images, and his profoundly human imagination, Taylor is considered as one of the masters of English eloquence. Conclusion. Thus during this period we find English prose developing into a grandiloquent and rich instrument capable of expressing all types of ideas, scientific, religious, philosophic, poetic, and personal. By some optional English selected poems. 1. And wilt thou leave me thus? So Thomas Wyatt. And wilt thou leave me thus? Say nay, for shame, to save thee from the blame of all my grief and blame. And wilt thou leave me thus? Say nay, and wilt thou leave me thus, that hath loved thee so long in wealth and woe among? And is thy heart so strong as for to leave me thus? Say nay, and wilt thou leave me thus, that hath given thee my heart never for to depart, neither for pain nor smart? And wilt thou leave me thus? Say nay, and wilt thou leave me thus, and have no more pity on him that loveth thee? Haileth thy cruelty. And wilt thou leave me thus? Say nay, Q. Write short note on T. Wyatt's, and wilt thou leave me thus? Answer. Wyatt, along with Sorry, was the first to introduce the sonnet into English, with its characteristic final rhyming couplet. He wrote extraordinarily accomplished imitations of Petrarch's sonnets. His And Wilt Thou Leave Me thus is a love song. This song is composed of 4 sestets, 6-line verses, each with a refrain, say nay, which reflects the tone of desolation and anguish. The language is plain and straightforward, away from elaborate metaphors and oxymoron. Each stanza consists of a tacit sandwiched between the poem's refrain. This might be the first poem in the English language to start with the word and. The poet goes on in his incredulous way, pleading the woman to stay, listing the brief reasons why she shouldn't leave. In the first stanza, the appealing for her to deny her rejection places the effect of the separation more to her disadvantage rather than his. The narrator implies that the lady will be held accountable for the distress she has caused him. Here Wyatt is reminding the audience that courtly relationships are public entities in many ways, and the lady may damage her own reputation by dissolving this union. This implication reminds us of the tense social relationships within the Tudor court, wherein being out of favor could have fatal consequences. The second stanza deals with losses beyond those of the heart and mind. He reminds the lady of his loyalty, and how he has stood by her through good and bad times, which is expressed in the alliterative phrase, wealth and woe. Relationships were often conducted with fiscal implications being important, if not central, and money brought power and security to any match. Here there is a suggestion that his support of her may have been more than as a lover, but also as a financial patron. These sorts of bonds would be difficult for a lady to give up unless there was a replacement for her former beau. There is a veiled warning in the question as to whether the lady's heart can survive the impact of such a callous action as abandoning the narrator. Her rejection could have consequences on her own emotional, and perhaps physical, state. If she were to break his heart, she may, in turn, damage her own, or even fall prey to the court. In the third verse, he says that he gave his heart to her for them to be together, and not out of a desire to experience pain or embarrassment. His plea this time is for her not to leave him so broken and humiliated. By the fourth stanza the narrator is filled with hopelessness at the lady's dismissal of him. He asserts that her cruelty has destroyed him. The song concludes with the repetition of the opening two lines. Here Wyatt is using the structure of the song to add further social comment. By using a cyclical arrangement, there is an indication that the situation, along with the refrain, and the despair, will be repeated. There is no real resolution offered, merely an indication that the lady will continue to break hearts, and the narrator will continue to misplace his loyalty. There is much passion in the song, as indicated by the frequent use of exclamation marks, but no logic or conclusion. 2. One day I wrote her name Edmund Spencer. One day I wrote her name upon the strand, but came the waves, and washed it away. Again I wrote it with a second hand, but came the tide, and made my pens his prey. Vain man, said she, that dost in vain assay, a mortal being so to immortalize. For I myself shall like to this decay, and eke my name be wiped out likewise. Not so, quod I, let baser things devise to die in dust, but you shall live by fame. My voice your virtues rare shall eternize, and in the heavens write your glorious name. Where Venus' death shall all the world subdue, our love shall live, and later life renew. Q. Explain. One day I wrote her name as a love poem. Answer. One day I wrote her name is the 75th sonnet among the 88 that make up a moretti written by Edmund Spencer. This typical Spencerian sonnet is broken up into 4 parts, with a couplet acting as an answer to the poem. The poet speaks of his trying to immortalize the woman he loves by writing her name in the sand. He tries to challenge nature, or God, by trying to write her name in a place that is only going to disappear each time. By referring to the tide washing the name away, he is expressing a mental and spiritual immortality, and also referring to time, and that eventually we will die. When the poem begins, it seems that the speaker is recalling some past event of his life with his beloved in the seaside. With love, he writes her name in the sand by the sea beach, but the cruel sea waves come and wash away her name. Feeling challenged, the speaker again writes her name in the sand, but obviously, again the sea waves erase his beloved's name. His futile action has been the prey of sea waves. Noticing his action, his beloved tells him not to attempt to make the impossible thing, that is to write her name on the beach. She kindly reminds the speaker that nothing on the earth remains forever. Not only her name, but also she herself will one day vanish from the shore of life. Time is cruel, and death is certain. She calls him vain man for just trying to overcome the unattainable deed to make the mortal an immortal. In response, the speaker admits that everything has to die and perish from the earth except some virtues. And her virtues and her name will live in the eternal. He promises her to eternalize her through his verse. Her name will be glorified, and her virtues, and their love will live for ages, and ages through his sonnet. When everything on the earth will surrender in front of the cruel time, and death, their love will rise from that level, and live an eternal life. Every time his sonnet is read, and recited, their love will be renewed. During the Elizabethan age, love sonnets traditionally told the story of men in love with unattainable women. However, Spenser's sonnets from his sonnet Horati disobey the general pessimism and give an optimistic look at love. In fact, his Sonnet 75 shows such optimism that his persona, after realization in the poem, claims that his love will be immortal through verse. Sonnet 75 stands as a successful sonnet because it presents an optimistic view on love through graphic imagery and a realistic story. Spenser takes the success of the work a step further because he uses form, rhyme, personification, and alliteration to mirror the imagery and story of his sonnet. If we focus on a deeper level, the poet is concentrating on the virtues of his beloved. He has not mentioned her outer beauty, but her inner beauty and virtues. By immortalizing her virtues through his verses, the poet is celebrating the importance of spirituality and goodness of human beings. His prime focus was on the love too, the love for each other, not on the basis of physicality, but on the basis of spirituality. Spenser uses a very harmonious rhythm and an iambic pentameter to compose a pleasing poetry so as to immortalize his beloved. This sonnet discusses about the transitory world and the ways to make the love undying. Spenser is successful at bringing two contradictory forms of poetry in a same place with a magnificent harmony. The poem is lyrical and dramatic at the same time. A beautiful lyric is maintained in the poem, and the dramatic situation is created by the dialogue between the speaker and his beloved. The whole poem is marked by a strong sincerity of the poet's feeling of sadness as well as of hope that overshadows the mood of depression. The stanza pattern is a bar, BCBC, CDCD, E, and the sonnet has a melody that is uniquely Spenserian. Spenser uses puns, colloquialism and archaic words like vein, eke, quad, huens, right, winners, again, pens, vein etc. to enhance the musical effect and establish a link with the tradition. The dialogue lends a dramatic hue to the sonnet and speaks of the poet's originality not only in respect of his emotion, but also in respect of form. Spenser enthralls us by the beauty of his expression, by his exquisite stanza pattern, and the rich mellifluousness of his verse alongside his original and strongly felt emotion. 3. To Celia Ben Jonson, drink to me only with thine eyes, drink to me only with thine eyes, and I will pledge with mine, or leave a kiss, but in the cup, and I'll not look for wine, the thirst that from the soul doth rise, doth ask a drink divine, but might I of Jove's nectar sup, I would not change for thine. I sent thee late a rosy wreath, not so much honouring thee as giving it a hope, that there it could not withered be. But thou thereon didst only breathe, and sent'st it back to me, since when it grows, and smells, I swear, not of itself, but thee. Q. Critically analyzed poem, to Celia, written by Ben Jonson. Answer. Song. To Celia, by Ben Jonson is a beautiful love poem presenting the love the poet has for his beloved. There is a longing for his lady love. Poem is having a two stanza that are separated into sets of 8 lines. This piece follows a consistent and structured pattern of rhyme, abk-babk-dif. The first stanza of this piece begins with the speaker asking that his lover drink to him with only her eyes. These first lines define the emotional depths of their partnership. The speaker wants his lover to devote herself entirely to him, and with her eyes, indulging him as she would a drink. The next line describes what it is will give back to her if she chooses to commit herself fully. He will pledge himself to her with his own eyes. This wordless communication is quite intimate. The poet is allowing the reader into the world of this speaker. The speaker moves on from the idea of communicating through glances in the next lines as he tells his lover she is welcome to leave a kiss in the cup. It is here that he will look for her, knowing full well there will be no wine to drink. The poet has chosen to connect the indulgence of drink with that of love. These two acts, ways of being, and emotional states are the same. In the following lines, he states the thirst for love, which exists within the soul, can only be quenched by a drink divine. It is only something like the drink of the gods, which could satisfy his thirst. In contrast to this statement, he says that if he could indulge in nectar, that he would not change for wine. His emotions for his lover would not change. Additionally, a reader should take note of the fact that the characters in the poem are not well defined. The speaker's emotions are on display, but there are no lines devoted to who he is or who his lover is. This choice allows any type of reader to cast their own experiences onto the text. One will, ideally, be able to relate to the emotions the couple experiences. In the second stanza, the speaker begins by describing how, late, or later, he sent his lover a rosy wreath. This was an action that was deeply thought through, and meaningful to both of them. In the following lines, he describes why he made the choice to send her this gift, and what he meant by it. The speaker chose the wreath as a gift not for his lover's sake, but for that of the wreath. He prefaces his choice stemmed from a desire to give the wreath hope that it could not withered be in her presence. This hyperbolic scenario has a deeply romantic intention. He wants his lover to see how highly he regards her. It is as if she could stave off death in anything, or anyone around her. She revitalizes everything near her. The speaker's lover did not react to the reed as he expected. She did not keep it as a monument to their love, but instead chose to send it back to him after breathing on it. She did this intentionally, knowing how he would be impacted by it. When the wreath came back to him, he smelled it, and declared that it did not smell like it did before. It now smelled of his lover. Through these depictions of their love, the speaker is hoping to both flatter his lover and improve their relationship further. This poem is a short monologue in which a lover addresses his lady in an effort to encourage her to express her love for him. Johnson includes conventional imagery, such as eyes, roses, and wine, but employs them in inventive ways. As a result, the poem becomes a lively, expressive song extolling the immortality of love. John Addington Symonds, in his 1886 study of Johnson, calls the poem a masterpiece in its purely lyric composition and individuality. In true sense, song. Thessalia is a true love poem that is wholly dedicated to the promotion and continuation of a relationship. 4. Sonnet 140 W. Shakespeare. My mistress' eyes are nothing like the sun. Coral is far more red than her lips red. If snow be white, why then her breasts are dun? If hairs be wires, black wires grow on her head. I have seen roses damasked, red and white, but no such roses see I in her cheeks. And in some perfumes is there more delight than in the breath that from my mistress reeks. I love to hear her speak, yet well I know that music hath a far more pleasing sound. I grant I never saw a goddess glow. My mistress, when she walks, treads on the ground. And yet, by heaven, I think my love as rare as any she belied with false compare. Q. Sonnet 130 is typical Shakespearean sonnet. Explain. Answer. Shakespeare was a famous Elizabethan playwright, poet, and actor. Even today, he is widely regarded as the most talented writer and playwright in the English language. Sonnet 130 is a satirical sonnet by William Shakespeare. Shakespeare wrote the sonnet as a parody of traditional love poetry, which typically over-exaggerates how beautiful and wonderful someone is. Sonnet 130 is not a love poem, at least not by Elizabethan standards. The sonnet mocks 16th and 17th century beauty standards, particularly the influence of Petrarch unlike his contemporaries. Shakespeare chose to reject the fashion of comparing women to stars and other wondrous things. The comparisons in Sonnet 130 are lifelike and realistic. Although Shakespeare mocks romantic conventions, he retains the traditional structure of an Elizabethan sonnet. Sonnet 130 has 14 lines. There are 3 quatrains, or stanzas, comprised of 4 lines each. The 2 final lines draw the sonnet to its conclusion. As should be expected of Elizabethan sonnets, Sonnet 130 makes use of iambic pentameter. It's unclear who the woman is that Shakespeare refers to in Sonnet 130. Essentially, Sonnet 130 explains what it's like to truly love a woman. Everyone has shortcomings, no matter how beautiful or perfect they seem. To love someone, we must embrace these faults. We shouldn't gloss over shortcomings. Instead, we should celebrate them. Shakespeare invites us to cherish the subject of Sonnet 130, despite her average beauty and figure. In the first quatrain, Shakespeare compares his mistress to natural things. In each comparison, she comes up short. For example, he explains that she is nothing like the sun, because no one's eyes are as bright as the sun. She doesn't have coral red lips, either, because lips are naturally pink, or dull red. Her pallor is a washed out, dull grey color. She doesn't have pure white skin. Finally, she has wiry black hair. It isn't particularly beautiful. The second quatrain continues this theme of imperfection. The ideal woman should have rosy cheeks, and she should smell divine. Shakespeare's mistress has no such luck. He explains that her breath is foul, and her cheeks are pale. Commenting on a beloved's breath is especially unusual in Elizabethan poems, which highlights how different Sonnet 130 is from its contemporary works. In the third quatrain, Shakespeare touches on typical depictions of love. Poets and writers frequently compared their beloveds to goddesses and divine beings. Shakespeare deliberately refuses to use these comparisons. He explains that, although he doesn't know what a goddess walks like, because he's never seen one, he knows that his mistress is perfectly ordinary. She doesn't float on air, and she doesn't have any airs or graces. Likewise, there's nothing special about her voice. Her voice isn't musical. It sounds like any other voice. Although, Sonnet 130 makes negative comparisons, the tone changes in the final two lines. Shakespeare explains that he loves this woman because she is imperfect. Loving someone for who they truly are is a rare feeling, and Shakespeare feels blessed to experience it. There's a sense that he pities women who receive false and overinflated love poems. Shakespeare doesn't simply want us to appreciate this ordinary but lovely woman. He wants us to remember her. He makes it obvious that he doesn't love her because of her extraordinary beauty. There must be other reasons why he loves her. Being beautiful on the inside, then, makes her more special than the other women who feature in Elizabethan sonnets. Thus, Shakespeare is using all the techniques available, including the sonnet structure itself, to enhance his parody of the traditional Petrarchan sonnet typified by Sidney's work. But Shakespeare ends the sonnet by proclaiming his love for his mistress, despite her lack of adornment, so he does finally embrace the fundamental theme in Petrarch's sonnets: total and consuming love. 5. To his co-mistress Andrew Marvell had we but world enough, and time, this coyness, lady, were no crime. We would sit down, and think which way to walk, and pass our long love's day. Thou by the Indian Ganges side shouldst rubies find, I by the tide of Humber would complain. I would love you 10 years before the flood, and you should, if you please, refuse till the conversion of the Jews. My vegetable love should grow faster than empires, and more slow. 100 years should go to praise thine eyes, and on thy forehead gaze. 200 to adore each breast, but 30,000 to the rest. An age at least to every part, and the last age should show your heart. For, lady, you deserve this state, nor would I love at lower rate. But at my back I always hear time's winged chariot hurrying near, and yonder all before us lie deserts of vast eternity. Thy beauty shall no more be found, nor, in thy marble vault, shall sound my echoing song. Then worms shall try that long-preserved virginity, and your quaint honor turn to dust, and into ashes all my lust. The grave's a fine and private place, but none, I think, do their embrace now therefore, while the youthful hue sits on thy skin like morning dew, and while thy willing soul transpires at every pore with instant fires, now let us sport us while we may, and now, like amorous birds of prey, rather at once our time devour than languish in his slow chapped power. Let us roll all our strength, and all our sweetness up into one ball, and tear our pleasures with rough strife through the iron gates of life. Thus, though we cannot make our sun stand still, yet we will make him run. explain marvels to his co-mistress as a Captain poem answer. To his coy mistress written by Andrew Marvell is one of the most celebrated Captain Seize the Day poems in English. It consists of 3 stanzas, where a lover is telling his lady love, who is shy, to shed all her coyness and utilize the time they have to the fullest. He says in the first stanza what he would have done if he had the time he needs. In the second stanza he warns of the shortage of time, and how she will repent later on, after death, for not using the time properly in love-making. In the last stanza, he invites her to join him in enjoying the pleasures of love, and make the most of the time they have on this earth. In the very first lines itself the speaker presents the fact that they, the lovers, do not have enough time. He tells his love that, if they had enough time and space to enjoy, then her coyness would not have been a crime. The word crime intensifies the lack of time. She is bashful, and hence squandering the time, instead of indulging in the acts of love. He then proceeds to tell her what they would have done, if they had enough time. They would have sat down, and thought about how to spend their day. She would be miles apart from him, spending her time by the side of the river Ganges, in India. And he would compose plaintive songs by the side of the river Humber in England. The reference to rubies is also significant, as the Eastern Orient lands were known for precious stones. Also, rubies are a symbol of virginity, and believed to protect one from lust. He then goes on to explore the aspect of time using various hyperboles, exaggeration. He says he would love her from 10 years before the flood, which Noah survived, as described in Genesis, and she would refuse till the conversion of the Jews, which marks the end of the world, and the end of time itself. We can see an intermixing of the past and the future here through hyperboles expressing the vastness of time. His vegetable love grows slowly, given they had ample time, and becomes vaster than the empires. The term vegetable may refer to organic love, that which evolves naturally, or that which grows and multiplies in great number. The lover resorts once again to hyperboles to express his passion and adoration for his love. He would need centuries to express his adoration of each part of the body of his mistress. And finally she would show him her heart, and they would consummate their love. But the tone changes in the next stanza as the speaker brings his love's attention to their present situation. They live in the world, which is finite, and governed by time. He focuses on the grim realities of life in this stanza. He could hear time's winged chariot hurrying near. The time is fleeting, and thus one should spend it carefully. Deserts of vast eternity lie before them, which remind one of the end, death, that one cannot escape. The image of deserts and sand also refers to the sandglass, or the hourglass that was used to measure time. After the death, all the beauty and other earthly qualities are insignificant, and the lady love would cease to enjoy the lover's song in her marble vault. Her body will be feasted on by worms. Her chastity shall turn into dust, and his lust shall also burn him up. Finally they will have a place of their own, their tombs, but it would be of no use after their death. The poet effectively uses imagery that presents the theme of mortality, and the need to utilize the time undisort. The phallic reference of worms, the burning up of desires, and the futility in dying a virgin, depict a morbid yet carnal image in the last stanza. The speaker proposes what ought to be done in order to prevent later regret. Their youth must be enjoyed, and the speaker invites her to give in to the bodily desires. Like two birds of prey engaged in love-making, the speaker asks his lady love to consummate their love. The time that is devouring their life shall be reined in, or be brought under control by making love. They shall roll up their passion, and burst into the iron gates of life ruled by time. The speaker is describing the physical act of lovemaking, and how it can help in transcending the universe that is ruled by time. In the last lines, the speaker believes that they could outrun the sun indicating time, even though they cannot make him, sun, stand still. Conclusion. The poem deals with aspects of time and death while discussing the physicality of love. It celebrates the carpe diem spirit and explores the aspects of mortality and impermanence. The idea of growth and limitlessness in the first stanza gives way to ideas of extinction and deterioration in the second stanza. In the last stanza of the monologue, we can see both the pleasant and the grave elements in the previous stanzas blended, giving us a violent yet pleasurable image of love-making.